Good evening, everyone. That was well-coordinated silence. Thank you. Nice job. I hope you're this good of an audience the rest of the time too. We'd like to welcome you to this session. The session is entitled Capacity Planning and Coordination for Tourism in the Arctic, Achieving Economic, Social, and Environmental Priorities. This session is being sponsored by EPLA Consulting Engineers and by the Icelandic Tourism Research Center. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for coming, especially at dinner time on a Saturday evening. We very much value your presence here and hope that you'll realize just as much or even more value out of the perspective that our panelists will share with us. We're here to talk about sustainable tourism and using tourism as a sustainable development tool in North Atlantic and Arctic communities. Throughout the conversation tonight, I think you'll hear the words coordination and capacity come up quite a bit, and that's good. I think they're important topics to talk about. When we talk about coordination, we're talking about coordination across many levels, both between governments and within government at different levels in countries, and among different sectors, among government, private sector, academia, NGOs, et cetera. A word about capacity. We often use the word capacity as shorthand. There's a lot of concepts in there. If I were a cynic, I would not like the word capacity because it implies sort of a zero sum, how much can we handle before it's just too much. Really, when we're talking about capacity here today, I hope we can all understand the word more optimistically, more oriented towards realizing our desired conditions, talking about what we want from tourism and for our communities and how to use tourism to get that while balancing among the environmental and social and economic considerations that often come along with that. So my name is Nathan Rigner. I'll be one of your two moderators. I am the principal of Recreation and Tourism Science, a small consulting firm that works primarily in the United States and here in Iceland. I'm also an affiliate of the Icelandic Tourism Research Center and was the 2019 Ministry of Foreign Affairs Arctic Fulbright Scholar here in Iceland. I'd like to welcome my co-moderator.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ólafur Árnason, and I come from EPLA Engineers. I'm a division manager for planning, and we've been doing a lot in terms of, well, we could say capacity assessments.
And we're going to have an optimistic and broad interpretation of that word.
And planning for strategy and for the growth of tourism here in Iceland. So yeah, I look forward to this evening with you.
Great. Before we introduce our panel, I want to give you a brief rundown of the way we see our program folding out this evening. After our welcome and introductions here, we're going to go through a series of brief presentations from the Icelandic, Greenlandic, Faroese, and Maine perspectives. Following that, we'll open up the panel for a discussion period. We as moderators are prepared with some relatively soft questions for our panelists, but ones that we hope there will be a lot of room for discussion with. We encourage you to use that time. We would much rather have you asking our panelists questions and sharing your thoughts with the panel than to hear ourselves talk. So please, as they're presenting, think about things that you would like to know from our panelists. Prior to concluding our conversation tonight, we'd also like to provide each of our panelists with an opportunity to make a brief closing statement, share in 1 or 2 minutes to share the summary points or key points that you'd like our audience to be left with. So understanding that that is the road ahead for us, I'd like to take a minute to introduce our panel. And we will begin with Julia Pars. Julia Pars is the Managing Director of Visit Greenland. Julia has been the director of Visit Greenland since the 1st of March 2008. Prior to that, she was director at Greenland's National Culture Center. Will you help me? Okay. Katwak?
Yeah.
Katwak, thank you. Being experienced in leadership and strategy. Julia has an MBA from the Henley Business School in the UK and holds a graduate degree in tourism economics. Julia has been influential in Greenland's tourism industry, working in various positions at Greenland Tourism since 1992. Thank you, Julia. Høgni Reistrup. Høgni Reistrup is advisor to the mayor of Tórshavn Municipality. His areas of responsibility include tourism and sustainable development. Hogne is a published author of multiple books discussing demographics, policy, and politics in the Faroe Islands. He has diverse experience working as a reporter and communications consultant, as well as being a popular musician in the Faroe Islands. I hope it's okay if we highlight that here.
Fine.
That'll come later this evening. Hogne holds a master's degree in media studies from Dublin City University in Ireland and the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. Tracy Michaud. Tracy Michaud is a professor at the University of Southern Maine, as well as a lecturer at Reykjavik University. She focuses on using her university teaching and research on responsible tourism management and tourism entrepreneurship to train the next generation of tourism leaders. She's a key link between Iceland and Maine on tourism issues. Her primary focus is on global connections and how they can inform local solutions. She led an effort to build an undergraduate tourism and hospitality degree program in Maine and created the Masters of Business Tourism concentration at Reykjavik University. She recently partnered with the Icelandic Tourism Cluster to host an intercultural exchange of Maine and Icelandic officials entitled Marketing to Management for Sustainable Tourism. Óskar Jósefsson. Óskar Jósefsson is director of the Icelandic Tourism Task Force. Previous to being the director of the task force, he was a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers and has been CEO of many Icelandic companies, including Icelandic Telecom. Óskar has more than 20 years of consulting experience in tourism and other sectors, and he holds a Master's of Science degree in Industrial Engineering. And last but not least, Ray Salter. Ray Salter has a background in environmental science and public administration. He was previously head of the New Zealand Ministry of Tourism. Now a consultant for the past decade, Ray has worked across the Pacific and more recently in Iceland. His areas of expertise are in sustainability, tourism strategy, and destination marketing. He's currently working on a number of tourism development projects with indigenous aspects in New Zealand and Samoa, a tropical island nation in the Pacific that is facing similar issues to many of those faced here in the Arctic. Ray is about to begin contributing to the development of the Icelandic tourism strategy for 2025. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. At this point, I'd like to invite any panelists who would like to view the presentations to leave the stage. They'll be joining us here in a little bit. However, Julia, you need to remain. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. And Tigitluariti, which is the Greenlandic word for welcome. As Nathan said, my name is Julia Pars, and I'm the Managing Director for Visit Greenland, which is the National Tourist Board. Our tasks are make Greenland visible, market development, statistics and documentation, and creating the right framework for tourism to grow. Together with all our stakeholders, not the least, the most important, which is the government of Greenland. Tourism plays an ever-increasing role for our country, an industry that we want to develop further to become an even more important pillar in the Greenlandic economy. Size-wise, Greenland covers most of Europe. With a population of just 56,000 inhabitants, it makes the population density the lowest in the world. If we simplify, our seasons can be divided into summer and winter. And speaking of capacity, which is why we are here today, we must say we have lots of it. But as you already know, tourism makes use of a tourism infrastructure in specific places that has to be planned well and managed. For Visit Greenland, it has been a very important goal to attract tourists who contributes with high value and low impact. For now, over 10 years, Visit Greenland has been a member of Adventure Travel Trade Association, And almost everything that Visit Greenland is doing as a tourist board is linked to adventure tourism. According to ATTA, adventure tourism is a trip that contains at least two of the following three elements: physical activity, natural environment, and cultural immersion or connecting with communities. All three elements are necessary for a complete adventure trip. Adventure tourists lay approximately 65% of the travel turnover locally. That is why we want them. They spend more, they stay longer, and they travel responsibly. So, how is tourism doing? Greenland received in 2018 almost 60,000 tourists by plane. Greenland experiences a steep growth in cruise arrivals, with now approximately 45,000 cruise passengers a year. So in total, we receive approximately 104,000 tourists a year. As you can see, the cruise tourism growth has become steep, which stems well together with Arctic destinations becoming increasingly popular cruise destinations. An increasing number of cruise vessels are right now being built for cruising in Arctic waters. However, in general, we can conclude that there is still a lot of room for growth and a large unused capacity during the shoulder and low season. And in most places in Greenland, we also have capacity for more tourists during summer. Greenland is a large land area, but the population is very small and is concentrated in small places. With scarce capacity, especially in summer in Ilulissat, which is our #1 destination, has contributed to slowing down the 10% growth rates we saw in 15 and 16. And only being able to fill up on beds and planes in such a small part of the year is a major challenge that we have to solve. We must succeed in spreading tourism more from the most sought-after destination and also make tourism a year-round industry. And we are working together with the airlines and the tourism operators to put more focus on winter tourism. Greenland has started for preparing for more tourism. The government has planned a major change in our infrastructure, increasing the size of the runways in Nuuk, in the capital region, and Ilulissat in North Greenland, as well as opening a new regional airport in South Greenland. All this by 2023. This is positive, as Greenland will become more accessible for tourists, and it is positive that we see an increasing willingness to invest in new hotels and new entrepreneurial startups. Our country is not only investing in airports, but also in themed visitor centers to help our guests get the most out of each destination. The first center is planned to open at the UNESCO site of the Ilulissat Ice Fjord in June 21, and more will be following the following years. The new visitor centers will have high-quality exhibitions which will add value to the visits of our guests. The greater and the faster growth in tourism, the more there must also be thought and planned in tourism infrastructure. Right now, the self-ruled government and Visit Greenland is working on their strategies, and we want to make sure that we manage growth, and Iceland has definitely been an inspiration for learning. As you can see, tourism is a complex affair, and this, by showing all this, I want to show that we have a lot of tasks to do. And it is really important as well that we coordinate things together, so the cogwheels, I think they're called, are running in the same direction. Tourism around the world is at crossroads. Issues related to sustainability or lack of it are becoming an integrated part of the responsibility we have. And we will, in Greenland, make sure to address this along with the growth in our tourism strategies, along with the growth. We will therefore be working with the following Sustainable Development Goals in our Visit Greenland tourism strategy. Number 4 for quality education, number 8 for a decent work and economic growth, number 12 for a responsible consumption and production, and number 17 for creating partnerships across stakeholders to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. Last year, we had a conference with a lot of our local tour operators and tourism actors in general. And we had a keynote speaker, Natasha Martin from Bannekin, who's very, well, an expert in adventure tourism. And she said that successful destinations measures value, tourism revenue, and not only volume. How many tourists. Locals are pro-tourism. There are clearly defined goals for acceptable change. They are safe destinations. They operate with 4 peak seasons. The government prioritizes tourism and premium prices taken, which is also called image pricing. Entrepreneurship and innovation are supported, and the destination lives up to the brand. We have a passion for localness, or seeing our country from the inside out, is what drives our focus on sustainable tourism development. Because sustainable tourism development not only benefits local people, but also needs to be driven and managed by local people in order to be truly sustainable. This vision fits well with the tourism market, which increasingly wants to experience a destination the way the locals do, which wants the authentic experience that is realized through the sharing of local knowledge. And here is our newest film on local knowledge, and by this I will end my presentation.
Greenland, known as an enormous country with a sparse population. Tucked away in its desolate Arctic location, you may be imagining a polar landscape spreading for miles and miles of ice caps, mountain peaks, open waters, and a vast variety of wildlife. This is true, but it is not the whole story. Greenland is very much inhabited by people who have been pioneers for thousands of years, by everyone Greenlandic. From small settlements to urban cities, we live and breathe everything that is Greenland. Our country is so big and has such diverse natural surroundings that we are a valuable contact to have. We would love to talk and connect, and we are someone you'll want to get to know better. The reason for this is that we do not only have great love for our Arctic corner of the world, but we also have great knowledge of it. We know our enormous fjord systems, the ice, the snow, like the back of our hands, even the most wonderful, secluded parts. We know where to spot whales, We know the best places to fill your bottle with fresh water. We will show you how to catch a fish 250 meters below the ice. We will take you to the best view of the Northern Lights. We know our animals, their different personalities, and how to keep them happy. We know how to cross the frozen fjord on dog sled. We've done it for generations, and we love to share it with anyone who comes to visit. We know how to find those moments where you're forced to stop, take a breath, and simply immerse, because we know which experiences are completely and overwhelmingly unique and not to be missed. That is our local knowledge.
Thank you.
Hogni. Next, we'd like to welcome Hogni from the Faroe Islands. You're up.
Thank you, Nathan, and thanks for the opportunity to tell you about the Faroe Islands and tourism in the Faroe Islands. I'm gonna present for you a sustainable tourism development strategy for the Faroe Islands towards 2025. So most people, they don't seem to know where the Faroe Islands are, or don't even know that the Faroe Islands exist. And that's not that strange. On most maps of the world, the Faroe Islands are not even there. And if they are marked by 2 or 3 small dots, hardly visible to the naked eye. This makes it difficult to imagine the stunning beauty that the Faroe Islands have to offer. So I will give you a short introduction. The Faroe Islands are made up by incredible fresh and clean air, dramatic landscape, steep mountains and deep fjords, green grass and no trees. The villages are small and scattered around 17 out of 18 islands. Most of us that live in the Faroe Islands, we own our own house. So you will not see big gray apartment blocks. Instead, you will see colorful houses, and in many instances, they will be grass-roofed. So we believe that there was a potential here. If we go 10 years back, tourism didn't hardly not exist at all in the Faroe Islands. So we've been an economy that's been very much dependent on fisheries only, open waters, and salmon farming as well. It makes up more than 95% of the GDP. So the Faroe Islands Tourist Board wanted to tell the world about our unbelievable sceneries. And with no tourism as such, the first thing that the Faroe Islands needed to do was to make tourism economically sustainable. And to do that, we needed money from the government, and we were supported with money from the government, and then money and then marketing. So marketing initiative started. First thing, the archipelago was not even on Google Street View, so the Sheep View campaign, I don't know if anyone heard about it, was launched, which was made as a protest that Google would not do Street View in the Faroe Islands. What do? You have to be creative. You don't have that huge budgets as other destinations. So Faroese sheep were equipped with 360-degree cameras and started filming the islands. They were out volunteers filming the islands. After the sheep campaign, Google came and made Street View, and the Faroe Islands received a lot of international media attention. So next, Visit Faroe Islands introduced Faroe Islands Translate, as you can't find Faroese in Google Translate. So once again, we were targeting Google, but also, of course, this is a marketing campaign. The service is powered by Faroese volunteers who live translate words or sentences for free, and it's simple. You write a random Faroese volunteer, and they will translate by sending a live translation back, and they will film it on a smartphone. So all video translations are uploaded to a website, creating a large video translation database that will continuously improve with every translation. All translations are stored, and the next time a person somewhere in the world wants to learn a Faroese sentence or a word, they might find it in the database. So, after all, Google did not add the Faroese language to their service, but the Faroese or the Faroe Islands once again received a lot of international media attention worldwide. These two campaigns, together with the other efforts to make the Faroe Islands a must-see destination for Instagrammers and social media influencers, have now made the Faroe Islands visible, and they are more often on world maps now than they used to be, and tourist revenue have doubled by 2020 compared to 7-8 years ago. So our third and until now most recently campaign was closed for maintenance, open for volunteerism, which was a campaign that announced that the Faroe Islands will be closed for tourists for a weekend. So all top attractions, all the famous sites, all the sceneries that people really want to see, they were closed. Instead, we offered volunteers to come to the Faroe Islands and maintain these paths and do fences and things like that. So then our North Atlantic islands shut for a weekend to all but volunteerists doing conservation projects. And this was an exceptional marketing campaign, but it was also about making genuine improvements to the tourist experience and providing visitors and locals with a proper cultural exchange, which is really important. I will come back to that later. The initiative should be seen as a milestone in the aim of aiming for a sustainable version of tourism for a country with only 52,000 people. So I'll just quote an American volunteer who traveled to the Faroe Islands during the maintenance weekend with her husband and daughter. And she said, "It's definitely the way we would like to travel, meeting local people and feeling we made some kind of positive contribution." So I will now show you a short summary of the movie, about the campaign Closed for Maintenance.
The Faroe Islands is a tiny country with twice as many tourists as residents. So how can the islands remain unspoiled by tourism? We found a solution. We asked the Prime Minister to help.
On behalf of the Faroese government, I hereby declare the Faroe Islands closed for maintenance and open for volunteerism during the last weekend of April. During the weekend, all sites and attractions will be closed for regular tourists. However, we invite volunteers from abroad to lend us a helping hand by...
But will people travel far to help a foreign country for free? Within just 4 days, 3,500 people from all over the world had signed up. On the last weekend of April, 100 volunteers from 25 countries arrived to help maintain the islands. Together with locals, the volunteerists help maintain walking trails, viewpoints and fences to preserve the country's nature. And then the story went viral again.
Nu skal vi til et sted, som siger nej, bliv væk.
500 articles.
100 frivillige fra hele
A massive online readership. 30 million social media actions.
It's a good news.
And a zero media budget.
Fantastic for the Faroes, fantastic for the environment, for nature.
Doing a bit of hard work, I think, it's worth it, definitely.
The initiative had such a positive impact on our environment that in 2020 we will repeat the success.
So, just a few more remarks. So tourism is now starting to play a significant role in the Faroese economy, which is just amazing. But there is still a great deal of work to be done to get the message out to the population, for example, that tourism is good. We have a high-income society, and we have one of our hugest problems is a lack of manpower. So we need a good balance so that we can get our tourists to know the locals. So we are proud of tourism, that we can live off the tourism, live with it, and in it. And so we can maintain our slogan, unspoiled, unexplored, and unbelievable. So we need to support the positive development, but also ensure that we work to achieve sustainable evolution in tourism. And that's why Visit Faroe Islands has developed a strategy for 2025, and it's called Preservolution. So if you think of the Close for Maintenance campaign, it was great marketing, but it was not only marketing, it was also managing. So we tried to manage tourism with a marketing campaign, so combining those two things. So the idea is to travel and do good. And Ditte Matilda, she runs a small-scale photography tour company through her company Vanger. And she says, I want visitors to meet locals and become friends. For me, tourism has to be a two-way process, and I hope we don't lose sight of that as we grow. So Preservolution is all about preserving. We want to preserve our society, our nature, and our identity. We want to evolve as well. And we think that preserving and evolving is a part of the solution, and tourists can be a part of that solution. So the strategy is boiled down to 4 cornerstones. And you can see them here. Quality over quantity. So local products, inviting travelers to come into local homes, talking to people, doing quality things, instead of just getting huge numbers of tourists to a destination. Quality over quantity, and tourists for all of the Faroe Islands all year round. So we want to expand the shoulder season, and also we want to spread tourists around the country, so they're not only on the main top attractions, but they actually do go out and explore the more unknown areas of the country. And knowledge and professionalization, we need to gather data to a huge extent, and we need a professionalization within the tourism industry, tour providers and restaurants and so forth. And a common legislative framework as well, as there is always a but. And the Faroe Islands, almost all mountain pasture is private property. So farmers have imposed fees to the most popular routes, but there is no clear consensus on how to manage the planned increase in visitors over the next few years. So there are some challenges as well, but most of all, we're really happy to see that there are more tourists now than there used to be in an economy that is really much relying on only a couple of primary business industries. So the good thing is that we can still make the right decisions, having both the Faroese nature and its inhabitants and economy in mind at the same time. So, thank you.
Thank you, Høgni. Tracy, please join us.
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I'm from Maine in the United States. We are the northernmost state in the continental United States on the eastern seaboard. We stick up into Canada. And we're kind of the end of the line when you think about us within the United States. But within the North Atlantic, we are actually the first port in the United States. So it puts us kind of right in the center of things. And over the last number of years, as we've realized that, we've been looking to the north. And I'm a professor of tourism, and we have found that there's a lot of similarities between what we experience in Maine for tourism and what's happening in the North Atlantic. So we've been trying to grow those connections. And I'll be talking about the balancing the economic, social, and environmental priorities through the education system. That is my passion now. I'm an anthropologist. I worked in rural Maine for over a decade doing community development and tourism, and I saw the importance, the vital importance of training that next generation, because sometimes it's that generation that's going to make the change. It's very hard to change minds of people, but if you teach from a young age a certain new way of doing things, then that's a lot easier for that change to happen. We saw that with recycling. It wasn't until these millennials that grew up with recycling in their school system came of age that we really saw the recycling take off in the businesses, because they just expected it. We didn't have to change their minds. And so this is our kind of approach in our tourism education, is to teach this young generation, start changing those market dynamics and the people that are out there. I have on here Portland Headlight. You can see that. It's going to be the background of all of my slides. It is known as being the most photographed lighthouse in the world. So that gives you a sense of our tourism. In a state of 1.3 million people, we get over 37 million visitors a year. So it's a lot of tourism. We've been doing it for a couple hundred years, so much so that our state is known as vacation land. So again, why Maine? We are connected. There's a map in the middle showing us Maine and Iceland. We're actually closer to Iceland in the North Atlantic than we are to a lot of places in the United States by flight. And there's a lot of things that we have in common. Tourism is our #1 industry. We are transitioning from a raw material extraction economy, mostly rural state, and we have nature tourism that dominates primarily why people come. Most of our visitors are visiting our South Coast region. We have a wild interior. In fact, the interior of our state, our Maine woods, is the largest tract of unorganized territories east of the Mississippi. So we have huge, vast parts of our state that are completely unsettled still. and an authentic brand and unspoiled culture. I'll put that in quotes. And that seems to be what we have found in Iceland, but also in Greenland and in the Faroe Islands, everything that we're hearing about, these are some of the same types of things. And some of the same issues we're wrestling with. Even though we've been doing tourism for a long, long time, we're having some of these sustainability issues, over-tourism, transportation issues. Our major national park is Acadia National Park. They had to shut down dozens and dozens of times because too many people were trying to drive up Cadillac Mountain and see the sunset, the first point of light that hits the United States. And it was becoming very dangerous, so they had to shut it down. And so they've had to wrestle with, what do we do about this? Do we want to expand our roadway? And they've basically said no, because that would destroy what's special about coming to this park where you're basically going on the old carriage roads. So they've created new types of approaches, like they are going to now, you have to make a reservation in order to go up. You not just have mass amounts of cars if you're not going to ride the bus. They're going to expand the bus system. So they're looking at ways to deal with these issues that, in a way that doesn't destroy what's unique and special about the place. We have a lot of the same infrastructure issues, urban versus rural. How do we spread out and work with communities in the rural areas? The changing landscape ownership. We have a lot of private land that's always had public access. And as more and more people might want to access that, that's becoming an issue. And more private landowners might be selling off land. And so access is changing. And I know that's an issue in a number of the North Atlantic places. Seasonality, workforce development, global understanding. So a lot of the same types of issues, and we have found that it's very educational for our students to look to other places that are different than themselves, but have these same types of issues. So at the University of Southern Maine, the way that we created our program, because it's a relatively new program, we're only 7 years old, for a state that has so much tourism, it's a very new program. And it's because our industry finally went to our government and said, we need to do something. This is our #1 industry. We have no training program in our public universities. And so from the beginning, we've been connected strongly with the tourism industry. And I think that that's a vital component in creating this balance, because so much of the decisions are made beyond us, beyond the people here, and it is corporate America that is making a lot of these decisions and leading the way. And so we need to find a way to bridge that gap and engage with the industry so that we can make changes together. So our education focuses on engaged, real-world, and interdisciplinary approach. We have 2 concentrations, hospitality management, so we teach our students the skills of the industry, the business side, management, finance, HR, all of that you would expect. But we also have the other side of our program, that is sustainable tourism development and innovation. So the way we look at it is we're teaching our students skills, but we're teaching them how to think about the industry. And those 2 things should go together. Many times they're very separate types of trainings in our higher education system, but we have put those together, and our students are required to take classes on both sides, even if they're going to focus eventually on one. So they get the business management, event management, but they also learn about economic development and community planning. They talk about the culture and environment and sustainability, and they do it in a real way out there in communities, talking to them about what are your interests for tourism, and then they talk and work with businesses on that side as well in terms of how they're engaging. Do you know what over-tourism is? What's your concept of responsible tourism? And actually, this picture that I have up here is a great example of how we bring that all together. So this is actually a picture of a class that we offered, and we worked with Holland America. So we worked with a cruise ship line because we believe you need to engage, again, with those businesses in the industry that have huge impacts. And the cruise ship industry, we all know, and I've been to many other sessions and discussions, it's an issue. It's a big impact. So our students worked with Holland America through AAA Travel, a major national travel organization. They internshipped with AAA, and many of them have gone on now to work for them. But what they did is they talked with Holland America on, they have a cruise to Bermuda, and said, what are the issues? What are some problems? And one of them was not having very authentic or culturally engaged excursions. So our students that were tasked with creating culturally engaged excursion. And what they did was created a local food tour and brought a Bermudian chef on board when we got to Bermuda to do a demonstration, and then did a local food tour with only local Bermudians. And interestingly enough, first off, we found that they had never invited a local person that wasn't connected to the cruise ship on board. So going through security was very, very complex because they had never really dealt with that. We finally got them on, especially with a chef with knives and all that good stuff. It was fun, believe me. But we got them on, and the other passengers heard about this because we were just going to do it with our group who planned it. We brought others from Maine along, so our students are really doing this tour, and not just for students, but for real passengers from Maine. Other passengers heard about it, so Holland America said, can we open this up so our other passengers can participate? And we said yes, and they had a huge crowd. And it was a day that people could be on shore, and they came in to be a part of something real, meet a local Bermudian chef, have that real engagement. And so when we talk about changing those market demands, they realized, at least in this little small way with this example, that people are starting to care about that. And so those are the things that I think at that macro corporate business level that are going to change practices when people start to care about that. And we at the education side need to teach our students to be thinking that way and start demanding that of their the places that they travel and the decisions that they make around that. And so that's just one example of how our program works, and those are the types of projects that we end up trying to do wherever we go. So engaging with the industry, trying to change that market demand. The second thing is cross-cultural education. See what other people are doing in other settings that have maybe a different governmental structure, or social structure, or cultural structure. That's where you're going to get new ideas. And so as part of that, we created a joint master's program with Reykjavik University that gives their Masters of Business students tourism concentration if they want. This is an elective they can choose to do. And again, we didn't create business classes. That's taken care of in their master's program. It's classes like global issues in travel and tourism, tourism trends, sustainable development and innovation. These are the classes that are getting added into the master's program to complement their business skills so they can think bigger picture about the industry. And being able to share back and forth. Our students have come to Iceland for 2 travel classes and take a look at the sustainability issues. Take a look at, we partnered with a geographer, so they looked at climate change and how the landscape is changing, and then we also looked at the human impact on the landscape as we visited different places. And then we make them try to think of solutions. Because that's sort of what it's all about, is how does this then help you change the way you think. And even if it's very small, like in Bermuda, that small little step, Holland America did realize, oh, this is interesting. We have people that really do want to engage in a real way. And then lastly, partner, work together. There's so many great ideas and wonderful research that's taking place in Iceland. We just heard from the Faroe Islands, there are great strategies. I am one that beg, borrow, and steal. When you see something good, let's copy that, let's work together. And so along that line, we brought tourism officials from Maine to Iceland this summer when I was teaching, and we hosted a intercultural exchange to talk about together. Yes, we need to train the next generation, but we still got to work on us now and what we can do now. What ways really does it make sense for us to work together? What are those things at the regional perspective that we can all benefit from? And so these were the participants, and we were talking particularly about this transition from management. Many of our destination marketing organizations are becoming destination management organizations because of the realization that that is very, very important. And so, we asked them these things specifically, and it seems that, yes, most are moving in that direction. We kind of see a global trend, but some are further along than others. There's been destination management plans created here, at least started in Iceland, which is great. In Maine, we're barely kind of starting down that track, but we're looking to do that. Issues, research, what can our students be involved in? And what are some of those questions that they could maybe jump in and help on? And one of the things that came up, tourism and fisheries interaction in Maine, especially with our lobster industry, there's a little bit of a clash and tension between that and tourism, and we find that in many of the North Atlantic places. Urban and rural, that's a continuous issue. And therefore, I make all of my University of Southern Maine students in Portland, Maine, head up north and check out, communities of 200 and talk to them about tourism. And for some, it's the first time they've actually even been up to that part of the state. And I think it's so important that they see both sides because there's very different issues a lot of times. Community tourism development, how do we actually work in communities? So we try to give them at least some basic skills in saying you need to understand what local communities want and need as well as what tourists do. And both of those sides have to be at the plate if you want to create anything that's ultimately sustainable. And cruise ship strategies. And then, so the best practices, our delegation from Maine love the carrying capacity research. We hope that perhaps we can get some of that done in Maine. And the destination management plans. Like I said, we've been doing tourism for 200 years and we still aren't quite at that point of having these really thought out destination management plans. On the flip side, we have in Maine been doing pretty good on the training. So our government just invested in a destination developer that is meant to go out and work in rural communities. That is her sole job. Help them start to think about. We have training programs now at the university, as I was talking about, a destination academy and online trainings for our rural communities. So there's things that we both have strengths in and weaknesses in, and so working together, keeping that global perspective, educating and training that next generation, I think, is going to help move us forward on that balance. Thank you.
For our final presentation, Ólafur Arnarsson, Epla. Thanks.
Hello and thank you. I think most people that know me know that I like to talk a lot. I've got the, the husky nice voice right now. I hope I get through this presentation so we have some time for discussions. What I want to talk to you about, I'm going to wrap up a few things that I at least think are interesting in terms of capacity and planning and responses to tourism growth. Hopefully these are things that we can then go into a bit further and discuss, and I think that Oscar, he will then participate in kind of deepening a bit what I have to say here. Some of the things I'm saying here, he may even want to address a bit differently, I don't know. Just 2 weeks ago, the Minister for Tourism presented our strategy until 2030. The overarching aim is to be leading in sustainable development. We've got 4 main, you could say, divisions or sectors that we are focusing on, which is value before quantity, benefits for locals in all of Iceland, unique experience, quality and professionalism, and balance between utilization and conservation. And of course, the foundations for all of this are coordination, transportation, quality, and knowledge. We're now starting to develop an action plan for this, for the next 5 years. And it's actually, to take a step back, this is a very important step for us into the future. Tourism in Iceland has been growing considerably I mean, we're a nation, a small nation. We've got, if you think about it in comparison with Greenland, which has about 2,160,000 square kilometers, we're only 5% of that, or something like that, with a population of 350,000 people. The proportion of Iceland exports was tourism 42% in the year of 2017, and 8 to 9% of the GDP. So these are the numbers that we have been experiencing over the last few years. From 2010, the growth has been dramatic. And if you think about this in terms of capacity, you could say that the population, which is the blue line, and then our visitors on top of that, show us the pressures that we have on our infrastructure and our society from tourism. And this is a considerable amount. If you look at the key figures and how we've been developing since 2009, you can see here a chart showing the proportion of tourism in GDP and the proportion of tourism on the labor market. And the red dots are Iceland's development from 2009. We're actually becoming a pretty big tourism destination, even thinking about destinations such as Spain or Egypt, which I think is the one here. If you also think about the share of tourism in exports, it's the same story here. We are setting, I would say, a new trend here. And if we compare ourselves with, let's say, other Nordic countries, for example, like Denmark, Norway, and so on, there's a huge difference here. So the challenges that we've been seeing, if you think about that, are these. There is a growing concern that key infrastructure is reaching a maximum capacity, if you think about it in those terms, or missing. There's increased pressure on public facilities and services, crowding in key destinations, degradation of environmental quality, worry that there's an exclusion of locals from nationally important sites, and then the cultural or social impacts on demography, changes in language, and so on. So this is something that we have been addressing over the last few years. There's also another thing that we consider here that has to do with coordination. The agencies responsible for tourism, in a way, of course, are many. Tourism cuts across all the sectors. So ministries of industries and innovation, environment and natural resources, transport and local government, educational systems, science and culture, and so on. All of these ministries and agencies somehow connect with tourism. So you could say that this organizational structure is not necessarily helping with the tourism industry. There are many agencies. The management can be uncoordinated. The administrative boundaries are unclear and the policy tools are lacking. And as a response to this, the Tourism Task Force was established, which cuts across all of these main stakeholders. So a coordination between the ministries and other main stakeholders means that within the board of the Tourism Task Force, you've got the Ministry of Industry and Tourism, Ministry of Environment and Resources, the Ministry of Transport and the regions. You have the Association of the Municipalities in Iceland and the Icelandic Tourism Association. So the framework until 2030 is a mutual framework, a vision of these key stakeholders for tourism. An overview of some of the things that we have here is, for example, the roadmap of tourism in Iceland until 2020, data collection on destinations to understand a bit better what we're dealing with here, the funding of infrastructure projects through different funds. An example of some of the major projects managed by the Tourism Task Force is the reliable data and key indicators, which is the dashboard for tourism, the carrying capacity project, which we call now, the Icelandic word is Jafnvægisás, which would be directly translated into the balance axis between the three dimensions of environment, economy, and society. You have the strategic framework, and then the action-based framework until 2025 that we just recently started preparing. So I'm just going to go a bit into the capacity project. Jafnvægisás ferðamála. The emphasis of this project is to look at the development of tourism and how this is affecting our economy, our environment, and our society. The key question was, in the beginning, how many tourists can Iceland accommodate when considering infrastructure, environment, and social acceptance? So the key questions are, what's the capacity? In a way that we have explained earlier on. How do we stand today in the near future? How movable are these key infrastructure for improvement? And what kind of capital do we need to improve infrastructure, for example? This is what we talk about when we talk about the key infrastructure. Of course, here, the tourist is using the airports and the ports, the roads, catering services, nature, recreation, and accommodation. But above this, we have all the infrastructure, the supportive infrastructure, of course. This is affecting all fields of our society, be it nature, be it the housing market, the labor market, and so on. So to understand this, we built a set of indicators, and this was done in cooperation with the main stakeholders here in Iceland through working groups where we had the participation of all agencies, the industries, the NGOs, and so on. This indicator system emphasizes on macroeconomics, the infrastructure, the social services, and society. And we make sure that we're dealing with environment, social issues, and economic issues within these. An understanding of what's acceptable and what's not was really crucial to this. You can't have sustainable development without defining what is acceptable, where do we want to be, where do we not want to be. And these levels for all these indicators was, for me at least, a main emphasis and a main outcome for us to work on in the future. These are the indicators showing the current situation. Each and every indicator shows that if you're here, you're on a green. If you're here, you're on a yellow, where you have to do something about it. Or here, where we think that conditions are not acceptable. So the current situation for our first assessment is this. This shows us the emphasis of where we have to focus our actions. We also did this for a future scenario growth until 2030, where we would have 1 million more tourists. Based on the do-nothing, there would be many problems arising in many aspects. So, coming back to the strategic framework, we now have the Jafnvægisás, or the assessment, and the key indicators of how we want to improve and where we want to stay. We also have the strategic framework for tourism until 2030, and based on this, we can form an action plan for tourism until 2025. We have the measurables to assess where we are going and how we will be, succeeding in this task. And this will, of course, trickle down to our local DMPs and DMOs as well. This was an overview, hope fast, so we have some time left to talk. Considering my voice, I'm pretty sure that Nathan is going to be leading on most of the questions, but thank you.
Panelists, please come up here and step briskly. So while our panelists join us on the stage, I think it's clear that there's a lot to say about these topics. That while each of the destinations that were discussed are unique in many ways, they also face a lot of common challenges. And one of the common challenges that I think each of the destinations face, or at least something that I heard everybody talk about during the presentations today, was the concept of capacity and capacity-related challenges. And so I'd like to address our first question to Ray at the end of the panel. Ray, you've worked many places all around the world, north and south, east and west, I presume, as well. As destinations at either the national or local level seek to address these capacity-related issues, what do you think are the key actions that they need to take to begin to move sustainably in this direction?
Thanks, Nathan. Tēnā koutou katoa. That's another language that you won't hear in Iceland, which is Maori. So greetings from 42 degrees south instead of 66 degrees north. Just to sort of turning to the issue, it is global. So the first thing that people need to be aware of is, what does the future look like? And I think it's obvious to everybody in this room that irrespective of what's happening in the globe, on the globe just about, that the future is going to be tourism growth and increasing. It's the world's largest economy, industry sector now, and it's going to continue to grow. The second part, if you've got an understanding of basically what the future looks like, the second part is really understanding as a destination what you have, what's your resources, what's your assets. And Oli's talked about the capacity project in Iceland. Again, you know, sort of where are we at this point? And the real goal after that is to get ahead of what the future looks like in understanding and preparing for it. And how do you do that? I think some of the critical things have already been addressed by some of our other speakers about coordination and collaboration. And I would say in particular between government agencies and the tourism sector, tourism operators, all those who are in the business, because at the end of the day it's going to require regulators, funders to also work with those who actually deliver the services to make sure that that the quality of the experience is there for our visitors, so that they come once and they return as well. But we are all facing the same growth prospects in tourism.
Do any of our other panelists have comments related to Ray's? Okay. Oskar, I have a question that I would like to direct to you next, and it does build off of Ray's comments. And the other element that I think we heard, or one of the other elements that I heard in all of the panelists' presentations today, was the importance of collaboration and coordination, and the need for coordination. You have been the director of a coordinating body here in Iceland for the past several years. Can you speak to the challenges that needed to be addressed, that coordination was required for, and what are the elements that that need to be in place to make that kind of coordination effective?
Mm-hmm. Yes, when we in 2014 and 15, when we had huge growth in the tourist industry for 3-4 years, we reached that problem that we need to coordinate and get through some decisions across the ministries and institutions. And when we started to, we were starting to try to implement strategy at that time, but the results was we need to put together a body which could work across the ministries and the institutional structure. And in 2016, we put in place Stjórnstöð ferðamála, or the Tourism Task Force. I think the key challenges, if you want to have a cross-border body like Tourist Task Force, you need to link it into the governmental authorities, and like Oli showed, we have 4 ministers in the board of Stjórnstöð ferðamála, and if we wouldn't have them, this journey would be, at least my opinion is that we wouldn't have been successful, because you need, usually the bodies in the government and the ministries and the institutions, they work in silos. And that's in the nature to work in silos. And they hate someone that is walking across the, that's in the nature. So if you want to have some action executed across ministries, across institutions, you need to link them quite high in the governmental structure. Otherwise, you wouldn't be successful.
It's the red box. Yes, please.
Thank you. We'd like to open up the opportunity to any members of the audience to share any questions or comments. Yes, please.
So I'm looking at the yellows, the greens, and the reds from your presentation, and I see, for example, that the housing market is in green here in Iceland. So we can say that tourism didn't really affect the housing market. And I wonder, what method did you use to get to these results? Like, did you survey people, or what was the method you used to get to this green result in here?
Should I?
If you surveyed people, who did you survey?
Okay, so when we did this, the emphasis was that we did this on the national scale. So we're trying to understand how the situation is for the whole of the country in this capacity assessment now, and to base it on the data that we already have. The data that we already had was, for example, the use of Airbnb and other such apartments in rentals. In that case, we did look, for example, to decide, okay, what's not acceptable there? We have examples from around the country where municipalities have said, we're going to put in restrictions on Airbnb rentals because this is affecting our market. Jonas, the percentage that we used there for the red, 6%.
6, yeah.
And that was based on actions that municipalities have taken.
Yes.
So we looked at the data for those 2 municipalities, and that's how we set the first one.
Yeah. So this is how we do it, to try to understand it in the bigger picture. Of course, there are going to be, and we know that we want to dig a bit further into some of these issues regionally, and we did it in some cases for social services and so on. But for the housing, we were trying to understand it this way. Any other questions? Please, yeah.
I have a question for the gentleman from the Faroe Islands, but perhaps could be more widely answered as well. So it concerns the marketing slogan about the Faroe Islands being undiscovered. And I'm wondering if there's any kind of paradox or risk that comes with marketing a place based on being undiscovered. And what happens if and when it gets discovered, as it seems to be happening with this excellent campaign?
Yes, really good question. It's actually what Greenland just said before me as well, that you want to maintain your brand, and being undiscovered, and it's, of course, there's a paradox when there are coming lots of tourists. But just for the Faroe Islands, as for now, there's no such thing as mass tourism in the Faroe Islands. There are this year, or last year, 110,000 tourists coming to the Faroe Islands. More than half of them come by cruise ships. So they are there for less than 24 hours, basically. So there are only 400 hotel beds in the capital, which is, I mean, that's restricts the amount of tourists that can be within a year. So as for now, we can manage it as for now. But of course, the strategy towards 2025 is there to secure quality over quantity, for example. And we will do that also because we want to maintain our slogan, which is untouched and unspoiled and undiscovered. Yeah.
So do you actually want to limit the number of packs that you get?
Right now, we can't limit it because the numbers are not that huge, and we need a economical, sustainable tourism as well. And the season is really short. It's from May when the puffins arrive, and the tourists they leave again when the puffins leave in August. But we want to extend the season. And we do that, for example, by the municipality of Tórshavn is investing in MICE, so we can get the meetings and incentives and conferences and events to the Faroe Islands. We're supporting that financially because that also creates a professionalization in the industry and creates some more jobs throughout the year so that people are not only working with tourism throughout the summer months but can actually make a living out of it throughout the year. So no, just to answer your question, at the moment we're not trying to keep tourists away, but we're going from only marketing over to management as well. So we're trying to managing the tourism. The tourist board in the Faroe Islands was only focused on marketing. And just recently, 2-3 years ago, was added to the task to also do managing. So it's quite new in the Faroe Islands, actually. Yeah. We don't have 200 years of experience in that field.
Well, you don't have the effect.
Exactly, and you could say that's a positive thing, but for us, to get it economic sustainable, we had to also increase the number of beds. So for next summer, 2020, the capacity will be doubled in Tórshavn. So we're heading exciting times, but there are also challenges ahead.
Yeah, that's very good.
Sorry.
Absolutely brilliant marketing campaign. Absolutely brilliant.
So we have a question for you.
Yes, my name is Thorvaldur. I work for the University of Iceland, situated in Hornafjörður in southeast Iceland. And I'd like to begin by thanking the presenters, especially from Greenland, the Faroe Islands, and Maine, so showing me your part of the world. All of them are very lovely. I think Nathan mentioned at the beginning the key concept here is capacity. And a couple of weeks ago I was asked to come to Tromsø in northern Norway to take part in a conference. And I think my role was to try to sort of help them avoid the dangers of over-tourism based on the Icelandic experience. And if you think about capacity, and for example in Greenland, your plans to extend the airports and build new airports, the question becomes, how can you prepare for the future? What hit us in Iceland was runaway tourism. And we were totally unprepared. It hit us at a time when we were really, really suffering economically. So we couldn't put the funds needed into the infrastructure. And what I'm trying to say is, if you build things, develop infrastructure, which increases your potential to welcome people, are you then in danger of things going out of hand? How do you justify putting large sums of money into infrastructure if the future, both you're not sure the people will come, or if they do come, they might be 10 times more numerous? It's late in the day, I'm sorry, my mind is in this.
I understand you well. It's a perfect question. We are, well, my heart is put into this matter, actually, because one of my biggest concerns, because we have a huge country, but we have very small communities. So I'm very concerned also if we put too much pressure on the different settlements or the smaller towns. So this is something we must plan for in our upcoming strategy. And we have already some small places that we should dig deeper into, and because there are certain days, not our summer season is so narrow, or what you call it. If you think of the whole year, it is only 3 months where we have a high season. So we are thinking about it, we are planning for it, and it will be in cooperation of course, a collaboration with the municipalities and also the government. So yes, I have my heart into this. I wouldn't want to see mass tourism in a small place with only 45 inhabitants, and we should be able to plan for this.
A final question, Hafstedt.
Yes, indeed, two questions to Tracy. How big part of those, I think, 36 million tourists you're dealing with are coming from cruise vessels? And how many of those are coming from other countries than America and Canada?
Yeah. Most of the visitors that come to Maine are driving in. So we are within driving range in New York City, Boston, Washington, D.C. And so the vast majority are driving in. Cruise ships have increased drastically over the last 10 years in Portland, Maine. Started with a couple dozen. We have well over 100 now. So that is increasing, but it's only putting a few 100,000 people into the cities. And it's not necessarily that number that's an issue. It's the fact that 5,000 people descend on a small place at once, and the capacity issues that creates. But international travel, Canada obviously is the biggest component of that. The next is actually Germany coming in, but we're only looking at maybe about 10% of that. Most of it's domestic, most of it's driving in, and we have a unique situation in that we have a 70% return rate. So if people come to Maine, they are most likely going to come back. So that's an interesting, it's good in some ways. We get the same people, so it kind of develops a real connection. We have a lot of tourists that feel like Maine is a second home to them, and in fact, many of them do have second homes. But because of that driving traffic, then I think things like mass transportation and whatnot are not as developed as well. In places like Iceland and Faroe Islands, where primarily people are coming in on cruise ships or through flights, I think that there's done a much better job on the mass transportation to get people around. We have a lot of cars that are constantly driving, and you pretty much need a vehicle to visit most of the places in Maine. It's still a small percentage internationally, but it is growing.
Excellent, thank you. I'm sure we could stay here all evening and continue discussing these topics. We do want to provide our panelists a brief opportunity, maybe 20 or 30 seconds, to share one final thought, to make a key point that you would like to make. So let's begin with Julia and go right down the line.
Yes, what I want to say is Iceland and also Faroe Islands, where we've been this year, has been a great inspiration for the Greenlandic tourism development. And for Iceland, it's like looking 10 years into the future. We can learn so much of you, and also Faroe Islands, which we are more comparable to. And you're also ahead, of course, with your Vaga airport. And it is also like looking into the future for us. I think some of the inspiration I get from you is that you're ahead with your numbers. You measure where your tourists are, where they go, and you also have created the right framework for growth. Tourism Task Force, that's very inspirational, and this is what I wish for also for Greenland, that we get a team that looks into both possibilities and pitfalls.
Yeah. So what the Faroe Islands did was to focus firstly on creating economic sustainability in tourism. That's pivotal in order to have tourism at all. So once that was done, we're now focusing more on the environment and social, really, because we measure or we ask the population, are you satisfied with tourism, or do you think tourism is good? And Iceland, I think it's somewhere 90% or something that was said net positive. In the Faroe Islands, it's only 60%. So we need to do something in order to get. So we're supported by the locals is really important, and if you can do that by marketing the Faroe Islands at the same time, because the Clothes for Maintenance campaign actually also communicated internally to the Faroe Islanders, saying, look, tourists are part of the solution. They're actually here to help us, guys, so be positive. So I think it was a genius way to both get attention abroad, but also to start managing tourism locally.
I would just say, don't forget the educational institutions. Make sure they're at the table. Give chances to students to be a part of that solution. We have a student here from UNE, one of our partner institutions, and she's writing a master's thesis. And so everything we're talking about, she's taking with her, and invite people like that to the table. They're the next generation. It's what it's all about. And so don't forget about them. And educational institutions also have research arms that are associated with them many times that can help be a part of that solution.
I have heard something about the uncontrolled growth rate in the tourist industry. Now we have had growth rate for the last years in Iceland up to almost 40%. In my mind, and maybe what we have learned in Iceland, when you have a growth rate that is above 5 to 7% year after year, you are in a good shape. But if you are over that, you need to implement some kind of management system or tools to slow down the growth, because I guess there is no nation that have the capability to build infrastructure to deal with higher growth rate. And as we saw in the slides that Oli was presenting, we have built society and infrastructure in Iceland for 350,000 people, but indeed, then we are 400, and in the summertime we are 450,000 people. And we need to have infrastructure in place for these residents that are permanently being here. And the funding process, the funding isn't the main problem. It's the time that it takes to build and implement infrastructure projects.
Just got a couple of comments, really. I guess one of them sort of thinking about the Faroe Islands and Greenland, is that visitors are going to be everywhere on the globe. The consultancy that I work with deals in 2 countries that have 1,500 people each in the countries, and they're never going to be on a map. And that's Niue Island and the Tokelau Islands. There's another one, Kiribati, which the highest point is 3 metres above sea level, so watch that one. And our most recent project, which is a really strange one, is in Bikini Atoll, which is in the middle of the Pacific where the Americans tested all their atomic bombs. Nobody lives there, but it's a dive site because the ships that were there when they tested the atomic bombs are very popular to dive on. So there's a tourism opportunity everywhere on the globe. So, don't discount what you've got. I think the other thing that I've observed, and you also see it in the Capacity Project, there's 2 fundamentally important things that need to be considered. And one of those is the community acceptance or social license to operate for tourism. And the second one is about the skills and education for the next generation and also this generation of people who are going to work in the tourism industry, because when it's all sort of broken down, tourism is a relationship sector. It's about people interacting with people, and people will put up with a poor airport or a not so good flight experience. But if the people aren't accepting and encouraging and connecting with visitors, that will destroy the experience and it will destroy tourism. So in terms of the indicators, they're the hardest to measure, but they are fundamentally important.
Good last words, I have to say.
Yeah. Thank you all in the audience for spending your Saturday evening with us. What a compliment that is. Please join us in a round of applause to thank our panelists who also did a wonderful job.